How's it going?
Good, thank you. I've got a very small, very new baby.
Oh my goodness, congratulations. How old?
She is 17 days.
Oh, so super new. Oh my
Super new.
goodness.
So I will do my absolute best, but it is possible that she will start crying and I will have to go and deal with that.
It's totally fine. It's totally fine. Thank you so much for hopping on. Everybody's super excited about it. Are you getting any sleep these days? Probably not a whole lot.
Not a lot.
I guess that's to be expected, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I think I knew what I was getting myself into. Like, nobody kept it a secret that there was no sleep involved.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I feel like when I had my first kid, though, like people were like, well, yeah, I don't know. I just didn't feel like I was properly prepared for like I feel like it was like, oh yeah, well, there's some stuff, but it's fine. And then
I feel like no one can prepare you. No. Like my husband took her out for a couple of hours earlier, and I missed her so much. I was so happy she was gone, and I missed her so much. It's such a confusing combination of things.
Oh, so funny. Oh, well, congratulations. You guys must be so excited.
It is. It's amazing. It really is. And she's gorgeous, even though she's nocturnal, but otherwise she's gorgeous.
Oh, that is wonderful. And tell me again, where are you based?
London.
London. Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah. So how is the weather there this time of year?
It's actually lovely. We're very lucky. It's been sort of about 20 degrees, well, probably 18 degrees today, and very sunny, which is, not very London-esque.
Yeah. Good. Well,
where are you?
So I am in the US, right outside of Philadelphia.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
I don't know very well. I only know Philadelphia from Pretty Little Liars. That's my only frame of reference.
Yes. I feel like every place gets like a certain, I don't know, reputation, right? From movies or TV or books. And then it's like, oh, well, maybe it's sort of kind of like that, but.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not a whole lot. Folks are just coming in. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Happy Sunday.
Hello.
Happy Sunday.
How is everyone doing?
Awesome.
Great.
Good. Good. We're just going to give folks just another minute or two. Rebecca's little might protest, so we don't want to wait.
Yeah, this is Margot, and she's nearly 3 weeks old. So yeah, she may object, and then I may have to go there, but fingers crossed she's going to stay asleep.
Listen, that's her prerogative. I feel like when you're that age, you're just going to do what you want to do regardless, right?
Yeah, exactly. And she let me write the book, so that's
there you go. Well, wonderful. Like I said, people will start to make their way in. Obviously, I'm Antoinette. I want to go ahead and get started, though, just so we don't run out of time. Rebecca, why don't you just start with, first of all, thank you so much for agreeing. You've got a 3-week-old. I don't know if at 3 weeks my brain was even together to be able to talk about anything. So I will have to commend you for that.
Mine may not be. We'll see how we go.
And that's fine too. So I thought maybe we could start off a little bit. I think you have a really kind of a cool background. I was hoping maybe we could start off with just a little bit about your bio and kind of how you got to where you are now.
Sure. So I was a journalist. I am a journalist. Sort of. I'm not doing anything right now, but in theory, I'm a journalist. I did a degree in creative writing. But I was mostly writing for sort of British newspapers, sort of about women's issues, women's interest, feminism, or very sort of I was at the beginning of my career in the kind of 2015 Me Too movement time, which is a really exciting time to be a young female journalist. And then, I was very fortunate. I ended up getting picked up for a multi-book deal in the UK, Penguin Random House. I just can't remember who published it in the US. I think it might be HarperCollins, but I forget. So my first book was called Perfect Liars, and that wasn't published in the US. And that's a kind of similar thrillery type vibe set in a girls' boarding school in England. And then it's called Truth Hurts in the UK, The Truth Hurts in the US. Oh. So I wrote that in 2018, I want to say, or 2019. The date slightly escaped me. But yeah, so basically I've always been a writer, just basically doing any kind of writing I can get paid for. And then eventually ended up writing books. And I'm now, my fourth novel is being published in August this year. And I have one non-fiction, which is also published in the UK, called Rude, which is about kind of like a guide to being assertive. Though it was written before the pandemic, and it's amazing how incredibly out of date it is now. I reread it the other day and I was like, wow, this does not stand up.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Thanks so much for sharing. It's I always think it's interesting how folks kind of get to where they are. Everybody kind of jump in as you may. This is very informal, so you can pop questions in the chat bar, or you can just sort of jump in. But it was interesting as you were talking about the differences in the UK and the US version, whether it's titles. Sometimes I also see covers that are different. Did you notice any of that? And can you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Totally. So what happens is your publisher buys the rights either for the book in the country where it's being published. So for the UK, it's UK and Commonwealth, so they can publish it in Australia and all the other Commonwealth countries, or they buy world rights, which means they own it all over the world, and then they can sell it to other publishers. So the US bought it from my publishers, and they it's very different. So it's got a different cover. I much prefer the US cover. It's much prettier. The UK one is like dark blue with a swimming pool on it, which I do like, but the US one is cooler. And yeah, there were a lot of changes. They go through and they change, I think, some of the words. So I mean, like, the small stuff like trash or sidewalk or all that stuff. They also, there was some sort of sensitivity stuff that was changed. So I had made reference to what was referred to as Indian summer, which is when it's kind of like hot in summer, and somebody else makes a joke saying, do you mean Native American summer? And obviously in the UK we don't have very much sensitivity about Indigenous people, so I wrote that thinking it was, not big. And also I wrote it a while ago, whereas the publishers were like, this is not a good joke, you need to take that out. So in the US version that's not in there, and I probably wouldn't have put it in the UK version had I known. So there's definitely different cultural sensitivities, which was interesting. And yeah, they did, when I did non-fiction, I noticed the edit was very different. It's much more, the American version is much more compact, much more direct. It's shorter because they cut a lot of the stuff that wasn't sort of strictly necessary. So yeah, they are very different things. I have ended up liking the US versions better, I think.
Oh, interesting. No, that's interesting to learn, because when I see the different covers, I'm always like, why is it different? And sometimes I like the US better, sometimes I like the UK better. And as I was actually purchasing this book for our book boxes, I saw the two covers, and if I'm completely honest, I picked this one because I thought it was prettier. And just at first glance, I didn't even understand. At first glance, I didn't recognize the differences between the two covers, but I was like, hopefully this is the US one, because I really like the pink.
It looks like a little cake. I love it. I want to eat it.
Yes.
I actually don't have a US version. I have a picture of the cover on one of my walls, but I don't actually own a version of the US one. They're supposed to send them to you, and they did not. But yeah, no, I love it. I think it's really pretty, and it's one of the really exciting things about being published. So my first book is, in fact, both of them are published in Italian as well, and the Italian covers are very like dark and moody. Hello. The Italian covers are very dark and moody. The US one's much brighter and kind of prettier. The UK one's a bit more kind of like staid and a bit calmer. So it's really interesting seeing what apparently seems to appeal to different audiences.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I would love to hear a little bit about how the world of Poppy and Drew, and sort of how you came to write it, like what your inspiration was, if you had it kind of figured out, or if you just had the characters. We'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of your writing process.
So the original idea came from the fact that my husband hates talking about anything from the past. He's very much like, I just want to live in the moment. And interestingly, I say interesting now, I was not pleased at the time. We had been together for nearly 2 years when he told me that he was divorced. And he was divorced, but it's not like he had a secret wife. Like he was legitimately divorced. But I just thought he had lived with his ex-partner and owned a house with her. I didn't realize they'd been married. So and then I found that he told me this eventually, because we were getting married, and I'm Catholic, and we were getting married in the Catholic Church. Can't do that as a divorcee. So he told me this, and I was obviously fairly shocked. And while ultimately it didn't really make a big difference to my life, it made me realize it was an interesting idea to me, like how much you hide from people when you get together with them in a relationship. And also I remember having a conversation with him where I said, if it were your choice, would you have it that we just started with a blank slate and we never spoke about anything from our past ever? And he was like, yeah, absolutely, that's what I would want. And I thought that was fascinating, because it's not what I would want at all. I talk about my ex-boyfriends all the time. I mean, I've been with him for 10 years, so they're sort of not that recent now. But so that was where that idea came from. And obviously in our case, no one's done any murders, so it's not really about trying to like get away from that. But I think it is a reality that a lot of people want to go into a relationship totally fresh and totally clean and sort of, you know, to divest themselves. It's like kind of the eternal sunshine of the spotless mind mentality. So that's where that original idea came from. And also the sort of setting came from the fact that I used to go to university in a place called Bristol, which is about an hour and a half train outside of London. And it's a beautiful part of the world. And I used to go past this amazing house that was kind of 1800s, cut into the hillside, like kind of yellow coloured stone, surrounded by orchards, absolutely blissful house. So I really wanted to write something that was set there, because it always kind of stayed with me as this perfect setting. So those two things kind of came together really. And then I like the idea of writing about, I like a dual time frame, partially because I like them as a reader, and partially because that way the more sections you cut it up into, the smaller writing it feels like the idea of writing 80,000 words seems like a lot, but then if you put it in 2 time frames, then you're only writing 2 books that are 40,000 words. That feels easier. And then if you put more, and then in some of my books I have multiple points of view, because then again you're only writing 4 books of 20,000 words. So it's about kind of trying to make that feel more manageable as a task. And then also I really like romance books. I like romance in general, so I wanted to kind of bring a little bit of that in there, without sort of going full romance, but still have an element of a love story. Oh, sorry, that's the baby making noises. Yes, that's kind of how that all came together.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'll open up the floor just for a minute or two to see if there are any questions from any of our other community members.
Hey, Rebecca.
Hi.
Hi. I have a question for you. How long did it take you to write this book?
So I write really fast, because I don't know, I just do. So I wrote it in 6 weeks, the first draft.
Wow.
And I was working part-time as a journalist as well. But I think the thing was, I worked on one of those really mean newspapers where they make you churn stuff out, like that terrible clickbait stuff. I was writing that. So I was writing sort of 6,000 to 7,000 words a day anyway for work. So I got trained to do it really, really fast. So about 6 weeks from beginning to end of first draft. And then obviously the redrafting process takes a while. And that's the bit that, like, the structural redrafting stuff is what I find really hard, like moving things around and getting the timeline. And I always have stuff wrong with the dates. There's always somebody's been born at the wrong time. So that definitely takes longer. So I'd say from like writing the first chapter to actually being finished is probably, I would say, 5 or 6 months. But that's with it going to the editor and sitting with her for several weeks and then coming back to me and all of that stuff.
Wonderful.
So sometimes my sister said to me, she was like, oh, I loved it, I read it in 2 hours. And I was like, great, that was 6 months of my life.
Yeah, I feel like that's pretty impressive. That 6-week time frame is just, insane.
But then I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because my mum is also a writer and she takes probably 2 years to write a book. Like, there's definitely no right or wrong way to do it. But I think because I'm used to writing fast, and also when I first started writing, I used to just take my full lunch break every day and I would sit in a meeting room and write for that hour. And so that was the only time I got to write ever. And that's, if anybody wants to write a book, I always say that's the way to do it, is to use your lunch break. Like, actually take your break and eat your sandwich afterwards.
And use that for writing. Very good advice. Any other questions that we have from any other folks in the community?
Can I ask why you chose Caroline as the other perspective, and kind of just like if there was any specific inspiration for that family and that connection to the story?
So I think with Caroline, so I was a nanny when I left school, and I think I've always been really interested by the weirdness of that relationship when you live in someone's home and you're trusted with their children, and you're an equal and a part of the family, but you're also kind of a member of staff. And there is that weird kind of like authority, that there's a weird imbalance of power, I guess. So I think that's quite an interesting relationship to explore. But in my experience, when I was a nanny, the family I nannied for were not like, they weren't the best people. And I wanted to kind of explain, and I think it was interesting to look at like what a really genuinely perfect family, like imperfectly perfect family, looks like and how that works. And also I really liked Caroline as a character. Like I think she was a good person, and I think it felt like I felt really guilty, genuinely guilty writing it. Like I did mean things to her family and I felt bad about it, but I think in some ways I kind of wanted Poppy to have hurt somebody who genuinely didn't deserve to be hurt. So that's why Caroline felt like a good character to me.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting dynamic too. You were talking a little bit before about sort of restructuring things, and I feel like in the last several months, our books of the month have done the concept where you're sort of switching timelines, right? So you're kind of jumping either between characters or timelines, and it's always fascinating the way in which the author decides to do it. And I really liked this. I liked the way in which you gave just a little bit of the backstory of Poppy, where you were like, I wonder kind of what happened, and kind of waited, I felt like, till the end and like dropped the bombshell, which I was not expecting. And I love when that happens. I love when I don't know what's going to happen. I'm like, whoa. So could you talk a little bit more about finding that balance, right? How do you find that balance so that it flows, that it makes sense, that readers don't kind of get lost or forget about the backstory because there's not enough? Tell me about, I'd love to hear about that process a little bit.
Yeah, and that was a difficult one because there was loads and loads of Poppy stuff that got cut by my editor. And there was sort of chapters where they went back to her childhood home and they had lunch with her mom and her family were there. And it kind of, there was a lot more that made you, I think, feel bad for Poppy because it made you see quite how horrible her family were, and why she wanted to be part of Caroline's sort of perfect family. But that went for pacing reasons because it was slowing down getting to the reveals. So I think in the end, I ended up writing like a list of all of the exciting stuff that you would find out, and then trying to basically and I'm somebody who really sucks at maths, but trying to work out like what percentage of the book you got. So every 10% of the book, you would get 10% of the reveal, so that you felt like you were being like fed the good stuff as you go. Because I really hate it as a reader when there's like nothing for 90% of the book and then everything at the end. And I can see why. Like, because I try to write quite character-led stuff, I sometimes feel like, well, the characters are so interesting. Nobody will care if there's no plot. And I feel like actually the reality is people do care if there's no plot. People like plot, especially for thrillers. So I had to kind of dial that up a little bit. And I think originally there was there was sort of less bad stuff in there. Because I think because I wrote it quite a long time ago, but from memory, there's supposed to be a sort of red herring that you think she's going to have slept with the son. And then in reality, it's actually much more complicated than that. And that came from my editor because, again, she just wanted to kind of keep that pacing going and slightly mislead the reader to bring them back in another direction. But I think that's the value of having a really good editor, honestly. I think that the kind of the logistical stuff and the structural percentagey numbersy stuff is having somebody else to look at it from the outside. Yeah, I always find that is it's interesting how, like I said, you kind of go back and forth and you kind of get bits of this story and bits of that, and I like what you did here, which is you never lost, right? You never got so little that you lost or forgot about the backstory, right? You always had enough to say, oh yeah, and then like you said, you kind of come in and then you get that kind of chapter where you there was, and this probably makes sense as you were talking about the kind of odd situation of being a nanny, but some of the moments felt like really cringy, right? With Poppy and Carolyn and Jim. It was just like, it just feels so odd, like an awkward and and uncomfortable, but it's a fundamentally odd and uncomfortable relationship, I think, when you're living in somebody else's home. And also I think with those characters, the idea was that she ends up being caught somewhere between being their daughter and their friend and their employee. And I think that's very, very difficult thing to navigate when you are having, and I mean, I don't have a nanny. I quite like one, but I don't have one. But I can imagine that it is quite a complicated relationship to navigate from that side. I've only ever been on the other end of it. And from that point of view, it is cringy because you're sort of, And I certainly, I remember stuff like I would go downstairs in my pajamas and then be like, oh my God, actually, I'm like fairly naked in somebody else's home. I live here, but I definitely shouldn't be doing this. And it's all very sort of intense. You're trying to work it all out.
Yeah. And what about the and I don't remember her name, the original family where Poppy got fired from in the very beginning. I don't remember the woman's name, but she sounded absolutely dreadful.
Yeah, Henderson.
Was the idea to make her just, I mean, was that the idea she just was kind of almost a villainous character?
Yeah. And I think sometimes I try to write complicated, flawed people who are good and bad as people are. And sometimes it's fun to just write somebody who's a total bitch and there's no redeeming qualities. And I think very, very, very rich people very often are like that. And again, having worked for some super rich people as a nanny, I've seen quite how awful some of these people can be. And it was nice to be able to just make her unrelentingly horrible.
She's so bad.
Yeah, really horrid. No good qualities. And also one of those people where you think, why on earth did you have children? You never see them. You definitely don't like them. What was the point?
Yeah, I definitely got that from her. I'm sorry, did you have a question, Nicole?
Yeah, sorry, I'm a teacher, so I'm like the hand raising. I was gonna ask. I was gonna comment. I saw the connection between Poppy and I think it was Jack, the child.
Yeah, the son.
I never thought that. So when you said that, I was like, whoa, like I totally missed that. But that might be just because I wouldn't want to see that, or like I didn't want that.
You're a teacher, so I'm really glad you didn't see that.
Yeah.
And also, to be fair, when I reread it, it's something that I think actually I could have probably dialed up because it wasn't my idea, it was my editor's idea. And originally he was like 11, and then the idea was to make him more like 15. So in that arena of it would be very, very wrong. But if she's 18 and he's 15, it's like a different kind of wrong, not like, it's more screwed up than illegal, even though it would be illegal. So yeah, that came from the editor, and I think rereading it, I think it's like lightly done and probably could have been dialed up a little bit more. But yeah, I see what you mean. I don't think it's like overtly stated at all.
Yeah. And then you were talking a little bit about all the things that were kind of changed between this version and the original, or taken out. Is there anything that like you really put a lot of thought and effort into that you really liked, or anything that got taken out that you kind of didn't want to be taken out, or just that felt special to the story that was taken out, or like a favorite part?
So I think they took this road trip to go and meet Poppy's mom in person, and it was and I remember I wrote it on a writing retreat, and it was really sad because it was that thing, when even, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but when somebody doesn't like their parent but they still desperately want their approval, and that kind of sense of I hate you but I still very much wish you would just tell me you were proud of me. And there was a lot of that dynamic in there. And I think they went to lunch and she said something, she ended up swearing in front of her baby niece, and there was a family row, and she stormed out, and Drew kind of saved her. And it was another one of those kind of Prince Charming moments where he is perfect, because he is perfect apart from not being. And I did really like that. But I think the majority of stuff that I cut, I wanted to cut. And I think it depends on your relationship with your editor. But generally speaking, I've never had an editor who would like push you to cut something that you really like. If you feel like it really belongs in the story, then I think generally they will respect that. But then it's a two-way street, right? Because if somebody says to you that this really slows your plot down, then you kind of have to listen to them because they are the experts.
Thank you.
Yeah. What about, I'm always fascinated with some of the the characters that we don't see a lot of. Obviously the main characters get most of the pages, but I thought there were some really interesting sort of side characters. I thought, like you said, the mother, I thought Poppy's mother was really interesting. Sometimes we talk in some of our book club meetings about the people that we wish we heard more about, or that we would get a sequel or something on. For me, Poppy's mother was a really interesting character. Just, the idea of that she had these religious beliefs, and that dictated how she felt and how she thought Poppy should act. And it seemed to have, kind of a strain on the relationship. I wonder if you got far enough to kind of thinking more about what her mother's character would be had she had the opportunity to be fleshed out a little bit more, or like maybe a little bit more about her motivations or what made her kind of who she was.
Yeah, and I think the religious aspect is really key, because there's something very specific about the kind of person who converts later in life, who isn't kind of like not raised in the church. And also I think there's something about the kind of person who goes to church on Sunday but then treats people badly all week, you know, that kind of, and there's a very, like, I was raised Catholic and I knew a lot of people like that, with no like goodness in their heart, just the kind of, you know, just the habit of going to church and just a lot of rules basically, but no like love. And I think there's definitely a lot of that in there. But I also think she, from what I remember, her backstory is that she was left by Poppy's father and was very, very embarrassed by that, and very ashamed of being left. So kind of clinging for somewhere to belong to and somewhere to feel like she had a merit. And also I think maybe looking for some kind of dignity, because I think there is a sort of indignity in being left alone and not wanted by the person who you've had children with. So I think that's probably where that came from. And it's interesting because she, obviously we only really get it from Poppy's side, and she is a very cold woman and not a very nice mother. But then she does know what Poppy did. So there is probably an element also of her thinking that her daughter's a fairly awful person. So there's stuff on both sides. I think also there's an interesting relationship shift in that her mother is working class, doesn't have a lot of money, lives in a fairly sort of, you know, ugly, rundown seaside town without much going for her in her life. And suddenly her daughter is married to this millionaire and has this huge house and all that stuff. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic shift.
With the other.
Oh, so it's a Zoom, two-way street.
So do you, when you're writing your stories, do you kind of outline, for lack of a better word, some of the backstory of your characters before you start writing the story?
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly the main characters, and then I guess by extension their families kind of get drawn in because they are part of stories. So yeah, I definitely have a very solid understanding of where all the characters come from, because I think you sort of need that to be able to predict how they're going to behave. But it is a weird experience. Like sometimes the character does feel like it kind of presents itself fully formed. And I think with Poppy, I definitely knew instinctively that the hardest thing was I couldn't think of the right name for her. And it took absolutely weeks and weeks and weeks. And then I realized it's because the name that your parents give you is obviously like a sign of who they think you're going to be. But so your name is actually not even about you at all. It's about your parents. A name that she'd given herself, as well as a name that she'd been given by her mum, because that felt like it made a lot more sense to who she really was as a character. And yeah, naming is always exhausting. It's always one of the hardest parts. But yes, I do. I definitely really outline who they are and where they've come from before I start.
Great. Any other questions from any of the community members?
I don't know if I have a question as much as I just like want to acknowledge, I'm sure this was very intentional, but I thought it was really cool, the similarity between Poppy and Drew and their backstories when we finally get the kind of reveal, in the sense that like both of them did change their names. So they were kind of creating their new identity, partly based on kind of what you're explaining, like coming into their own identity and also hiding from their past. And both of their murders were accidental or not fully their fault, or you know, they were young and you know, the things that happened were either connected to someone else, or they didn't know the consequences of their actions and the full scope. So I just thought that was really cool and really creative to like have that kind of parallels between their two lives, and then they come together. And then I think with the end with Gina, she's hurt, but then they make the conscious decision to do this together and actually become this murderous couple. I don't know how to like
no, totally. And the idea, I don't know whether, so it's I don't know whether there'll ever be a sequel, but I sort of started thinking about one, and the idea was that then they would be living in a new town, and now they actually know each other, because they don't know each other at all in the first book, whereas now they actually are this murderous couple. They're like the Murdertons, and I think it would be really interesting to watch them navigating that relationship together. But yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because that's exactly what I wanted. Like, I wanted them to be literally perfect for each other, and they're soulmates. They're just very bad people.
It kind of like, I never read the book, and I know it's based off of a book, but the You television show,
Yeah,
it gave me a little bit of those vibes. I haven't even seen like the most recent season or anything.
but
So
him and Love and
Yes.
Love and Joe, that kind of, they're both, yeah, it definitely, I mean, I would say I did write it before I watched that. But yes, absolutely, it does have that kind of vibe to it. That kind of like, there's someone for everyone, even murderers.
yeah, totally.
Murderers need love too.
Yeah,
How
absolutely.
did you come up with the idea of Drew paying Gina to like hook them up? Was
It's a
there
really
any?
good question, and I think I remember the logistics of it being a nightmare, because I think we needed a reason for Gina to know something was wrong. I think we needed a reason for Gina to be suspicious of Drew, and we also needed Gina to be a bit flawed, because otherwise she was kind of too perfect of a friend and too perfect of a person. And also I think we wanted the sense that there was more to Drew than we knew, and that he had, that was it. The main thing was that we wanted it to have not been an accident that he met Poppy, that he actually had located her, that he knew what was going on, and that he was looking for her. But it was a really complicated one to work out, and also it was really difficult to kind of balance the idea that Gina was a good person and a good friend, but that she was hiding this secret. So we went back and forth on it for a while, and then eventually kind of settled on that being the explanation. But there were lots of different ones. There was a version where he had found Poppy on Facebook. There was a version where he was a friend of the Hendersons. So we did try it lots of different ways.
Well, I think her backstory, with her, it seems like she drank a lot and maybe also was not very wealthy. Like, you could see where she would have reason to maybe cross over that line.
Yeah, and I think also not having any money makes you it's very easy to have morals if you have a lot of money, but if you don't have a lot of money, then actually, and I think she's a fundamentally good person, but she's also tough, and she takes what she can get when she can get it. And if somebody, a very rich white guy with an expensive watch says, I need something from you, she's not the kind of girl who's gonna be like, yeah, sure, I'll help you for free, because why would you?
So I am the kind of reader who, like, if I find something in a book, I go down a rabbit hole. So I know that at some point in the book, you mentioned that story, Rebecca.
Yeah.
I actually went and watched the black and white Alfred Hitchcock movie.
Oh, I'm so glad you watched the original one, because the Armie Hammer one is so bad, but the original is really good.
Well, you know what? When I was looking online, the review said the Netflix version that was done very recent was really bad. So I said, well, let me watch the original. And I had to find it on YouTube, because it's not streaming, because I don't know what it was, like in the 30s. I don't know. It's really old. 1949
or something. It's really old.
Yeah. But it was really interesting because I saw parallels there between sort of, the main character in the movie, as well as in your book. Just the idea about, she went from kind of being, I guess, staff to being catapulted into this really multi-million, really, really rich atmosphere, and figuring out their places and where they belong, and that discomfort, because I felt a lot of discomfort from Poppy throughout the book. And I couldn't, until the end, I didn't really understand. I was like, well, yeah, I understand that it's a different lifestyle, but she just felt so, her confidence wasn't there. She felt very odd, kind of out of place. And once we kind of got the entire story, it fell into place. But I wonder, how much that movie Rebecca was an inspiration, and how that was with your writing.
So, so there are two things I would say. I think one thing that is interesting there is that a lot of it is a class thing, and that is such a British thing, that we have this sense of the class. I think the commentary that I've been told is that race in the US is like class in the UK. So it's the thing that people notice about you very quickly, and it's something that can be perceived as like defining your horizons, and I think it can shape how you're treated a lot of the time in the UK. So I think that's definitely a big part of where that discomfort comes from, that she knows that she's not. There's an expression, PLU, which stands for people like us, and it means when you meet somebody and they know which knife and fork to use and what to call the bathroom, that they are like the right kind of person, and that she doesn't feel like she is that person. But yeah, in terms of Rebecca, so the book of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier is my favorite book of all time. And obviously my name is Rebecca. The book is called Rebecca. Not a very imaginative person. But yeah, it was a big inspiration. And also the other inspiration a little bit was the Bluebeard story, where you're sort of not allowed to look behind the door. You marry somebody and you can't look behind these doors. So I think there was, Rebecca and Bluebeard, and a little bit of Jane Eyre in there as well. But all of that kind of sense of marrying somebody who is older, wealthy and powerful, and then and finding your circumstances changed automatically. And it's quite a sort of uniquely female experience. You don't really find men marrying up like that in the same way. But as a young woman, it's one of the few privileges you have, I guess, is that you can, in theory, socially catapult yourself upwards if you're pretty and you meet the right person. But then that comes with huge downsides, and I think that's a pretty universal theme in a lot of stories. But yeah, Rebecca is definitely one of them, and I would really strongly urge anybody to watch the film or read the book, because they are great. But yeah, not the Netflix one. The Netflix one is very bad. Also, I can't look at Armie Hammer anymore now that I know that he wants to eat people. It just doesn't don't feel the same about him.
Yeah, it's very good. I feel like it was pretty quick. It didn't take a ton of time, and I thought it was. I'm not hugely into like black and white films, but like I sat down and I was like, this is really good. Like it was a really solid.
There's
story.
also it's on YouTube. There's also a BBC adaptation, which is great. It's got Charles Dance from Game of Thrones as Maxim, and that one's also really good. That's in color, because I can't concentrate on black and white. I'm pathetic. Can't do it.
It takes a lot of imagination, I feel like.
But it makes you feel very classy. If you watch a black and white movie, then you are, you tell people about it a lot.
I mean, I did maybe drink a little tea with it, because I felt,
This is a very classy afternoon. I'm very impressed.
Yes.
I'm watching Project Runway and the Kardashians. I have no taste.
That may be your next inspiration. You never know, right?
You never know. What will those Kardashians do next?
So Nicole, you talked about this a little bit, but the ending with Gina, that I did not see coming at all. I'm curious what led you to go down that's a very extreme route. And I think it had some significant impact for Poppy and Drew's relationship. But can you walk us through a little bit about the decision there?
So I think it was originally the fact that I like Nicole said, neither of them had actually done a murder, really. It was very much accidental. And in Drew's case, we don't know whether it was him or his brother who actually did it. And in Poppy's case, she did a bad thing, but she didn't kill him. And ultimately he killed. And I think interestingly, there's subsequently been a case in the US about a girl who sort of peer pressured her boyfriend to kill himself. Obviously an incredibly tragic story. And I can't remember if that was happening around the time that I was writing this. I feel like it was, but I might be misremembering that. But ultimately I think, you can't force somebody else, even if you are a very, very bad person. So the thing with Gina was that means they then have actually done it. Like they are now murderers. They're united in that, and they're also now fully tied together forever and ever and ever, bonded by like the worst thing a person can do. And also I think there was a sense of like you needed something to get them to the next stage of their relationship, and this was going to be it. So then they're going to start over again. They're going to have the house knocked down. And to be completely candid, didn't really work out the exact details of how they got away with it. And I, as a thriller writer, I do like to keep my body count quite low, because I don't like writing murders. I get really stressed writing the murder, and I get really stressed trying to work out how to get away with it. So I think part of the reason that it came late is that I wanted to kill someone, but I wanted it to be towards the end of the story.
So Rebecca, I have a question. So let's talk a little bit about the kiss that was initiated by Jack or Poppy And was that the reason that Jack really killed himself?
So I think the idea was that it was supposed to be in there that he had quite significant mental health issues anyway, and that I think he was quite a complicated and unhappy person, but that the prospect of losing his kids and his wife was such that he couldn't face going on. But I don't think it's entirely Poppy's fault, because I think you would have to be quite emotionally damaged to do that anyway. And I think also there's got to be a kind of, the way that he did it, it was fairly vindictive towards his wife. Like that, the way that he left that note and stuff, that was, sorry, the baby's making noises. That was going to mean that she felt guilty for the rest of her life. So that was a very cruel thing to do to his wife and his children. But I think he must have been quite messed up anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that was an interesting dynamic. Just that I did not see coming either.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, I like the idea because I didn't think anybody would see it coming. But the problem is, and I remember my editor saying to me, yes, but you needed to be able to see it coming a little bit, otherwise it's just completely random and it makes no sense. And it's trying to strike that balance between doing things that are surprising to the reader, but then if they read the book again, they could see the clues that it was coming, rather than doing stuff that's completely random so that people are like, what was that? Where did that come from? Just for the sake of being shocking. So I do remember my editor saying, you need to really ground this idea in that he is quite mentally unwell anyway. And again, I think rereading the book, that's probably something I would dial up a bit more if I were to write it again, just so that you did get this sense that their marriage was actually much more complicated, because Poppy sees it as perfect, but no marriage is perfect. And it's important, hello, yes, it's important that I would like it to maybe be a bit more clear that it isn't a perfect relationship at all, that actually they do really have their struggles. It's just that she perceives it as perfect because it's so different and so much better than what her parents had and what she grew up with.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like at least from my perspective, I did get that impression that it was not a perfect relationship. Like you could feel the almost anxiety from Carolyn when she was talking about like, oh, is he going to be in a mood? And I don't know how he's going to act. And he's happy now, so I don't want to rock the boat. Like, I felt like that was helpful. And I think there was one time where they were going to have sex or something. And, so I feel like at least from my perspective, it was clear there were things that were happening, but it seemed to be maybe highly based upon his mental illness and her just trying to deal with it, right?
Yeah, and I think she was fairly unsympathetic towards his depression. I think she sort of had that slight attitude of, if he just tried a bit harder, he'd be okay. And I know people, even pretty good people, who were like that. But I do remember, I think she was originally a doctor as her job, and then we changed it so that the fact that she was so unsympathetic about his mental health issues would make more sense. But actually I missed, and the proofreader missed one bit. So even though she's a lawyer, it says she's in surgery at one point, which is, oops, maybe not in the American version, maybe that's only in the UK version.
Did anybody see that? I didn't see that.
No, I mean, nobody's ever pointed it out to me, but then why would they? But yeah, I read it and I was like, oh shit, that's not supposed to be there at all.
Oh, I love that. So we have a discussion where, Rebecca, part of our community, we have like an app, and we go on there, we kind of ask questions and talk about the book as we're reading it. And one thing I know we were talking about was the house had all these weird things happening with the faucet turning on and overflowing and the mirror breaking. And I know myself, and I think a couple of the other folks thought, oh God, okay, maybe the house is haunted. Like maybe that's why.
Yeah.
That's why these things are happening. Was that sort of a red herring on your part? Like lead the reader down this route?
Definitely. And I think having stayed in some sort of big houses like that, I think it can feel very, very haunted. Like I think it is haunted in the sense that bad things I feel like sometimes when you go into a house where people have been very unhappy, there's a little bit of a stain on it. I don't think there's actual like ghosts wandering around turning taps on, but I do, in the same way that, when you go into a church, you get that feeling of like, you can feel that it's a holy place. I think this is the opposite of that. This is a this is a sad house where bad things have happened. And I think that manifests. And also I think she's very frightened of the house. It's very big. She's there alone a lot of the time. And I think it's very human to want to be able to see all of the walls around you at the same time. And when you're living in too big of a space, I think it starts to really play tricks on you. And I don't think it's haunted. I think all of those things had perfectly logical explanations, but I think she is making stupid mistakes because she's frightened, and I think the house is very big and very sad, and those things are making her and she's picking up on that.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Any other questions anybody has for Rebecca? I know I don't want everybody to have a chance to kind of jump in.
I wanted to go back to the ending a little bit because I know you were saying it's kind of like you skipped over the how they got away with it part. I just thought it was really interesting because with Poppy and Drew, it's curious for me for them to start over. Like Drew obviously has friends who know about his past and know things about him. So when they start over, how does he, there's people that care about him, that know about him. And then with Poppy, she has no one now besides Drew because Gina is gone and her family is gone. And then with Gina, theoretically, she was staying with her mom. Like, how does her mom not be like, where did my daughter disappear to? Like, it was just some of these curious things. Or like with the Thursday House feature in this magazine, it's a big deal. And that's what spiraled the events. I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, well, literally that same day they commit murder in this house and demolish it and move on and change their names. But there's also this publicity feel around her in this house. So I'm just, I know it's not in the book. It's just, my brain was like, how in the world are they just going to like up and go?
Yeah. So I think the way that I squared it was that I think probably they claimed it was an accident. So Gina had been drinking, and she drunk drove, which would have prejudiced the investigation against her a bit anyway. So the idea is that they I think would have claimed she fell down the stairs and smashed her head open, and then would have kind of said it was an accident, and then they had the house demolished, like part to make it harder and harder and harder to get any more evidence to the contrary, but also pretending that it was out of deference for her having died there. And then in terms of starting again, so the sequel that I sort of started playing around with was set 4 years later, and they were living in this village in Scotland, and they had moved twice now because people had found out things about them both times. And they were sort of, and I think, and the idea was that they had a daughter called Coco, and they couldn't keep moving because the daughter was starting to remember, well, I used to be called Emily and now I'm called Coco, and was saying things. And also they were starting to run out of money, which I think would be really interesting because I'd always, they've had so much money, but I think it had cost a lot to be able to disappear that many times. So they were starting to run out of resources. And I wanted to see what it would be like to see them without all these riches and knowing it was their last chance at kind of having this totally clean start with their names. And they both, she's dyed her hair. They're both kind of trying to escape because there would have been publicity about what happened. But I think also because Drew is fairly wealthy and powerful, there would have been a little bit of control about how much publicity there was. And I think money and the right connections take you a long way in going away with things. So I think that would probably have played into it as well. I'm just gonna pop the phone down for 2 seconds because I need to readjust the baby. Sorry.
Not a problem at all. I did like a lot the dinner guests, or I guess they were the weekend guests with all of Drew's previous friends. Oh my goodness.
She's very pink. She's been lying on a cushion.
So cute. I'm curious that whole weekend, right, where she's sort of trying to figure them out and she's trying to impress them, and some of them are being a little snooty to her and that kind of thing.
She totally misunderstands how to do. These are people. She should have just welcomed them, done a nice casserole in the kitchen, a dog walk, and clean sheets for everybody's bedrooms. And instead, she tries to turn it into a sort of fun. And also, I think I don't know whether it was a British thing, but they're a very different kind of wealthy from Mrs. Henderson, her old boss. Okay. Her old boss is the kind of like new money, flashy show off. These are the kind, these are like the queen kind of rich. Like they wear old clothes, holes in. They drive, 20-year-old cars, and she fundamentally misreads that because she's young and gauche and doesn't really know how you're supposed to behave. And I think that's a big part of understanding where she gets it wrong.
Yeah, that dynamic was also another one of those cringy moments where you're like, oh gosh, please just stop. Just
stop trying so hard. It's horrible people. But I think it is interesting because there was a lot of back and forward in the writing of it about how much do those people know about his past and how much are they. But I think the idea is that they all knew, they grew up with him, they regard it as a terrible accident for which he is not guilty, and they are very forgiving. But I think it's an interesting question about after that story ends, would they understand why he had moved to Edinburgh and was trying to have another name again? Like, how many times can he change his identity without them? But I think there's something about friendship from childhood that you do sort of forgive quite strange things from people. And I sense that they would say, well, that's Drew, he's a very strange man, but we love him, and that's kind of what he does.
Yeah, it was nice kind of seeing a little bit of his background and what his story was, because honestly, I thought it was going to go a different way. Like, I thought Drew was going to be completely well, maybe he is psychotic to some extent, but I thought he was going to be like the danger, right? I thought that was the danger. It's like, you meet this guy, you don't know him, you get married, you decide to talk about the past, and then you find out he's like, going to harm Poppy. So I was very concerned throughout the book that Poppy was going to be harmed.
But actually, I genuinely think he is a really, really nice man whose life was completely ruined by the fact that his brother did something terrible and he happened to be there. And I think the problem is, I think he spent his entire life feeling guilty about it, and then got to the point where he's finally happy, and then he will do something terrible to defend that happiness. But I think the murder thing is entirely out of defense of Poppy. I think it truly, like, he really does love her very, very deeply.
Yeah. That's what I thought was one of the things I thought was encouraging was that even though they kind of met in awkward circumstances, they really did, as you started going throughout the book, they really did seem to care about one another quite a bit and started to really form a relationship and kind of start relying upon each other.
I think so, and that's a hard thing to write, because writing people falling in love is tricky, but also writing the relationship, usually people fall in love and that's the end of the story, right? But this is trying to write a story where they've got a functional marriage that works, it's interesting, but they've got most of us, we have friends and careers and all of that stuff, and they don't really have any of that infrastructure. They've only got each other. And I think that's part of the problem, is that they lack those things to talk about. And also then they can't talk about the past. So actually they're very limited in their conversation. And that's why she keeps butting up against it, because it's totally natural. And they've really run out of conversational sort of road. And that's why I think once they had told each other the truth about everything, I think they probably would be very happy.
Yeah. What's something that that you hope readers take away from the book? I know sometimes readers have certain interpretations, sometimes the author may have a different one. I'm just curious, sort of, if you, in your perfect world, what are one thing or some things you hope readers take away from this?
Really interesting. I mean, honestly, as long as it was an enjoyable experience, like, my favorite thing is if somebody's read it like in the bath or on the beach, or like somewhere like where, if the spine's a bit cracked and somebody's been reading it on the way to work. Those are the things that I really want. Otherwise, I hope that they feel like they were interesting, well-drawn characters that felt like real people. Because to me, they really do feel quite real. And I hope that there is interesting stuff in there about class, about the relationship between being an employee and being a member of a family. And I suppose about the nature of new beginnings and forgiveness and fresh starts, I think is interesting as well. But honestly, if anybody takes anything away from it that stays with them, then I'm delighted. I think, I have things that I think about intermittently that came from books, not, great works of literature, just nice paperbacks that I read. And it's lovely to think that there might be a line from there that sticks with somebody, or a thought that sticks with somebody. That is an incredible privilege as a writer, that somebody I haven't met before might occasionally remember something I wrote just on like a random Tuesday. That's the real gift, I think, of being a writer.
Oh, that's wonderful. What a nice thought. Any other questions? I know we're sort of wrapping up our hour, but any other questions that we have for Rebecca before we end today?
Well, I'll just share with you that this is one of my first times doing this, like where the book is chopped up and you're supposed to like, kind of get questions at a certain time or comment at a certain time. And I did fine for the first part, which is like chapters 1 through 10. And then when it came time for the second part, I just kept going. So
That's so nice.
I
Thank you.
I was like, no. I'm like, okay, I know I should stop, but like, I couldn't really stop. So
That is the best feeling, really. It is. That's an amazing thing to hear. So thank you.
Yeah.
And your characters, I think, again, you could, I feel like outside of Mrs. Henderson, you could feel good and bad in everybody. I mean, you could tell how much Drew's friends cared about him and wanted to protect him. And, it just, I don't know. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, because I think, I was hoping for that there would be good and bad in all of them, because I think that's life, really, isn't it? Like there is in all of us.
Yep. Any other thoughts or comments before we adjourn? Wonderful. Well, Rebecca, we really appreciate you. We know you've got your little baby there, and she's at some point going to say, "Okay, mommy, stop! Like, just stop. I just need you 100%."
Good for now, but I think she's about to say she wants some food. So,
oh my goodness! Oh, I love when they're just snoozing, like the good life, right?
But then if she would do this at night, I'd be delighted. But no, she'll be headbutting me at night.
I know. Isn't it terrible how they get it confused?
I know. It's biologically a very bad system. Somebody needs to sort that out.
Are you out for some time? Do you have some time to stay with your little one before you?
Yeah. So for the UK, I've got 3 months, which for the UK is bad, but for the US is actually quite good. Most people here get a year. But I'm self-employed, so I'm taking 3 months. But actually, I'm very excited to get back to writing, and I'm very, very lucky because my job is my hobby. So it's not the same as having to go back to a proper job.
Yeah. Oh, nice. So good.
Thank you guys all so much for your questions. I really enjoyed talking. And it's funny because I wrote it a while ago now. It's actually so lovely to revisit it and think about it and go back to it. So thank you so much for asking me. I'm really thrilled to have done it.
Well, we're pleased that you could make it. I want to do a quick, if everybody has their, the community members have their book, I want to do a quick photo before we jump off for the day. Love the pink. All right, 1, 2, and 3. Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Rebecca, thanks again. Next month's book is Blue Skin Guides that have already been out. And our book club meeting next month is Saturday because the author is traveling. So it'll be a Saturday instead of a Sunday. Lovely to chat with you guys. And like I said, enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Bye-bye.
Bye.